I'm author Sarah A. Chrisman.
And I'm Gabriel Chrisman.
And today we're discussing this book, What Can a Woman Do? Now there's no copyright page in our edition, but the date on the preface is 1883. So this is a late 19th century book. And essentially, basically, if a modern journalist were to be given the assignment of covering the story, what career options were open for women in America at the end of the 19th century, or if a grad student had that as their thesis.
Right.
And they were magically given a time machine, and they were able to go back to the late 19th century, spend 10 years researching this assignment. This is the book that they would come up with.
Yes.
And so, as such, it is a really, really valuable resource for anyone trying to answer that question.
And it was written for women at the time, so young women at the time, so that they could see all the options and possibilities that were available to them.
Right.
And inspire them to go in one direction or another.
Right. And as a primary source that was actually written in the late 19th century, this is so much more valuable than any Google search you can possibly do, not to mention so much more comprehensive. I mean, you can tell it's a rather lengthy tome. And, you know, a Google search will, give you one sentence?
Yeah, pretty much these days, especially the AI-driven part of it.
It'll be one sentence that is the most stereotyped, the most ridiculous, prejudiced trope ever.
Limited, yes, extremely.
Limited, yes. Limited is a good word
It's
for
a
it.
very good word.
Right. Whereas there was actually a whole world of options, and this book explores those. So, first, before I get into those, I want to point out that there are different types of books. There are books that you have to sit down and read cover to cover. There are books that are best to just use as reference to look up what you want when you need it. This one is a little of both. So the first time I read this book, I did sit down and read it cover to cover. And then, because I've had this book for, gosh, must be 15 years by now?
Yeah.
Something like that. And in that time, after that initial reading, I have very often gone back and referred to specific passages or specific chapters. And I used it a lot when writing my Tales of Chetzemoka, writing my historical fiction series. So especially if you're an author, this is a really, really valuable resource on the 19th century.
To understand women and women's work in the late 19th century.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it begins by talking about jobs in big cities versus jobs in small cities, and the comparison of the competition for the jobs versus how much you get paid, and that is still an issue today.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, the more competition, the higher the pay, the more competition there's going to be for a job.
Right.
And not much has changed.
Right, that's pure economics.
It's pure economics, and they go into the wages for women in different positions in New York. So you got some real hard data in there. And then it goes through and explores a lot of different professions, and profession by profession, it cites and names very specific women who have done that profession, what their really remarkable accomplishments have been, and why they have been specifically chosen to be called out for the purposes of this book.
Why they're a good example.
Why they're a good example.
Yeah.
So it goes through that with women in literature. It talks about some women writers. And that chapter also, it gives submission tips, which I like,
Yeah.
which is really, really good. And some of those still apply. Like send good copy. Whether you're sending it to an editor or sending it to the public, make sure you've written it the best you can before you give it to anyone else to read.
Right. Use, editing and proofreading and everything else to your best advantage.
Right, exactly.
Don't put things you haven't gone over extensively out there in public.
Right, what you know. And a lot of tips like that. It goes through the profession of journalism, and it talks about some successful women journalists and how they got into the profession. It also talks about the ethics of journalism. Ethics. I think a lot of reporters would do well to read that.
Yes.
It talks about women lawyers. Belva Lockwood, of course, they have to bring up. She's a classic. In the field of medicine, there is a separate chapter for women doctors and for nurses. And it's really interesting that they go into why a woman would choose one of those fields over the other. And the explanations make so much sense, because in the first place, at this period in time, and Nurse McCoy says this in one of my books, nurses were getting paid to go to school. Doctors were not. And so if a woman wanted to be, if she was from a poorer background and her family didn't have much money, she didn't have money for school to be a doctor, but if she went into nursing, she could get paid while she was still in school. They would actually pay her to go to school.
And nursing was a female-dominated profession already at that time, whereas doctors were completely male-dominated.
Right, and part of that is the difference in how they get paid. Mm-hmm. Part of it also is, it's the same reason why in America there are still more men dentists than women dentists. And I'll get back to dentistry in a second. But the way that medicine was set up at this time, in the late 19th century, a doctor would have his own practice. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't, they were not yet into the whole situation we have now where there was a hospital that employed many doctors. Mm-hmm. At this point, a doctor would put in his own capital, his own money. He would start a practice and he would slowly build up clients.
Yeah, he would attract patients, he would build sort of a community and a whole system
on
his own.
Right, and this is still how most dentists tend to work in America. Now, the thing about that situation is that by the time a doctor has built up a clientele and is actually making a reasonable living and paying off his debts, he's at an age where if it's a lady doctor, she's probably going to want to start a family because she's
probably past that point, in fact, to a certain extent.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly. And so just because of our biology, there are certain years of our lives when if a woman is going to have children, that's when she has to do it. Mm-hmm. Those are the years that doctor was building up his practice at this point in time.
Or a dentist would be too.
Or a dentist. Mm-hmm. And the reason we still have more male dentists in America is that they still have that
independent practice model.
They still have the independent practice model, and things have gone a little bit differently for doctors, and that's why we see more women doctors in America. Now, my friend from Brazil, mm-hmm. I was talking to, and she said that in Brazil they have more women dentists than men dentists, and that's because they follow a model that's closer to the hospital model with their dentists down there. And so I thought that was very interesting. And I pointed out to her something that they discuss in this book, which is that the advantage of women dentists is they have smaller hands. And so something they talk about, to come back to the book, is that at this point in the late 19th century, there were not very many women dentists at all. They were very rare, but the ones that were there were very, very highly sought after. Mm-hmm. Everyone who could get a woman dentist wanted a woman dentist because their hands were smaller. And if you're talking about putting your hands in people's mouths, the size of the hands really makes a difference. Mm-hmm. So they go through things like that. They talk. There's a chapter on women in government, and that's not just politicians; it's also clerks. So it's the whole political
bureaucracy
hierarchy
of government.
Yeah, the bureaucracy of government. Civil
servants.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole hierarchy, because they do talk about women politicians too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They talk about women photographers and women telegraphers, which mm-hmm. that was a field that women really dominated, was telegraphy.
Yeah, and that's the sort of manual dexterity and the attention to detail.
Mm-hmm.
These were things that women were renowned for being better at the time.
Right, right. Especially this book is a little too early for telephones, but when they do get into the telephone era, then you see even more women in the telecommunications.
Switchboard operators and
Yeah.
even women managers basically of those switchboard facilities.
Yeah, yeah. So there were still, actually, amending my earlier statement, there were still a lot of men in telegraphy, but there were a lot of women in it too.
Yeah.
It talks about women as, so the sort of artists that did engravings, the sort of engravings that were used for the printing presses for printing illustrations.
Sort of working artists as compared and contrasted to fine art.
Right, right. So these are the ones who are actually doing the nitty-gritty manual work that creates the picture presses, basically.
And normally they would have been, in this era, working from a photograph or working from a piece of art that someone else had done, and they're simply translating that into an engraving for printing purposes.
Right, right. And they talk about booksellers. They talk about entrepreneurs, and in that section they get a lot into the topic of women's exchanges, which I've discussed before. And there's a section on women as elocutionists. So this is effectively the field that we would now break this up into separate parts. What was then referred to as elocution would now get broken into speech therapy and speech training. So training, or oratorical training.
Yeah.
And so they talk about women in those fields. They also talk about, and this is huge, because in the 19th century there were still so many people engaged in agriculture around the world. And they talk about women in what would have been the more feminine aspects of farming. So the big scale, the large livestock and grains tended to be the male aspect of farming.
Row crops.
Row crops, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Those tended to be the male aspect of farming. The aspect of farming that were absolutely woman's sphere were the gardening, the vegetables, the fruits, the raising of poultry for
That
market.
included rabbits.
That included rabbits, yeah. Rabbits were poultry in the 19th century, which is an interesting one. And raising bees. So it talks about all of those in this book, which is absolutely important for the culture of the time, because agriculture, again, it was huge.
It was central.
It was central.
Yeah.
And they talk about the aspects of women's lives that are available and open in taking care of homes. And they point out that if you actually had to pay someone to do all of these things that is involved in taking care of a home, that would get into big money. But a lot of these women do it as part of a working relationship within their family unit.
Yeah.
And just because they're not necessarily getting paid cash
Doesn't mean it's not work.
it's work, and it's very valuable work, because if you had to pay someone cash, you would go into debt pretty quickly.
Yes, absolutely.
So this covers a lot of ground, and it's a very, very valuable resource for anyone trying to understand the history of the 19th century.
Does it bring up childcare at all?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
That's under the home category?
That's under the home category,
Yeah.
and that's actually a substantial portion of the book.
Yeah, I would imagine, because that was definitely a major thing that women were involved in, and quite often for money too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here's a chapter on the education and manners of our girls, and how to educate girls on a small scale. So, absolutely a very valuable book, and I highly recommend it. Might be a little hard to find, but well worth the search, especially if you're trying to answer the question, what careers were open to women in the 19th century? Well, there's a lot.
That's a good source for it.
It's a very good source. So I hope you'll check it out. And I hope you'll look into my books as well. And we hope you liked this video. If you did, give it a nice thumbs up, and happy reading!